Lourdes, I'm going to start with a question that you probably weren't expecting, which is, how has fluency in tikitiki helped you in your legal career? And you may have to explain this.
All right, so the tikitiki thing comes from, I don't know, I was talking to Keith one day, and I don't know what we were talking about, that I said the word tikitiki, and he thought it was funny. But it's something that actually my mother always talks about, and she is tikitiki, and it's just persistency. It's just, if you want something, you just have to go after it and just go tiki-tiki, 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 from whatever angle you possibly can to get it. You just you just have to do it. And so that's where the coin is. And frankly, Keith, I forget why I used that term, what we were talking about, that it's stuck in your head. But it is a use in my family, a constant use, because it means you're just being a pest. And actually it does help. And in many things, I have used the tiki-tiki approach in trying to get people's attention. A lot of the times what I do is I just go to, if nobody's giving me attention, for instance, I'm calling or I'm sending an email, I just go to the president. And I send them an email. And then what I've also done in the past, which has served me great, is I'll put in the subject line, I'll put like a newspaper headline that makes them look bad. And then I always get a phone call or a response pretty much soon. I had somebody who had their water bill was really high. It just came like thousands of dollars because the meter wasn't working. And so I tried to contact the municipality, and nobody was really giving me an answer. Nobody was whatever. So I sent the mayor an email with the headline, elderly couple, non-English speaking elderly couple receives a $2,000 water bill. That's a headline on a news story. And he immediately called me, and we got it resolved within an hour. So it was great. So that's the tiki-tiki thing. You just try to go to the top and try to get it resolved with insistence.
So we're gonna jump about a little bit in terms of your timeline, but you mentioned the mayor. We have a richness of attorneys across the Mackrell International Network, but there's probably not too many that have worked for the mayor's office, and therefore sort of seen at least two sides of the die. Is that how the role at the mayor's office came about, by with a bit of tiki-tiki?
No, not at all. That was another mayor that I tiki-tiki'd. I would never tiki-tiki my mayor. This was and actually this is a funny story, and especially for the young people. I took, as some of you know, I took 14 years off to raise my family, to raise my children. During that time, I was involved in the community. And one of the things, besides being board members here and there in different organizations, one of the things I did is I led the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, we have a very small Hispanic community. So I led the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and I was the president and chair and all that. And I met at that time, the mayor was a city council person. And I went to his office once to talk about the Chamber of Commerce with a group of people. And then I met him, or I saw him in different events, maybe 2 or 3 times. And he ran for mayor. And at the primaries, he won the primaries. And at that time, the former mayor, the mayor at that time here was a young mayor who was under federal investigation. That's public knowledge. And the chief of police was going to jail for embezzlement. And so he wanted to clean up city government and all of that. And I won some some award, and he attended, which I thought was strange because he and I did not know each other that well, but he attended that event. And he, and so my background came up in presenting the award, and he noticed that I was a law enforcement, I had been a prosecutor before. So a few months later, passed, I saw him again, and he, at that point, asked me to be the city solicitor. And I thought, city politics, yuck. It's that, I hate city politics. I'm not into that. I'm not into any politics at all. So I really didn't care for that. And it took me a long time. My husband was actually the one who convinced me. He said, no one else will ever ask you to do this job. This is a cool job, and you should take it. And it was based on my prior experiences as an assistant state attorney in Miami, and then as a assistant United States attorney in Washington, D.C. as my law enforcement career. So I was not politically connected. We were even in separate, different political parties. And that's how that came to be. And that's because I was active in the community prior to that.
So we're going to come back to sort of both the raising the family and the sort of coming back into law after raising the family, and the battle to reestablish yourself. But let's just stick with that. Sort of being involved with politics, whether you liked it or not. How did you manage to sort of manage your team on the one hand, assert and exert your influence, and I suppose keep out of the politics?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I really had a lot of consternation, and I didn't really want to take this job because of politics. And I'm not, like I told you, I was not political, and I was, from the different aisle. But I realized that representing the city, and I made this very clear to the mayor before I took the job. I made it very clear that I was representing the city, that I was not representing him, and that I was not there to do his political stuff. And so I was going to do what was best for the city. And he said, that's why I'm hiring you. And you do what is best for the city, and you stop me whenever you need to stop me. And he was true to his word to the very end. And there were certain things that I said, that's not what is legally best for the city. This exposes the city. I'm not signing off on that. And he always respected that. He's a very good guy, and he's a very smart guy. And he always respected that. So I didn't play. And then of course I had to deal with city council, and that's another issue. There were 9 people, and they all had their own things going in politics. They were all, obviously very political. And so I had to deal with that. And, but I think because I took that approach, that I didn't represent anybody's political agendas. I represented the city, and it took them a while to get used to that, the city council a while to get used to that, because that was not the way it was done before. But I think I gained a lot of respect. And when I left, I did. And there were people who were opposing me when I first, I had to get confirmed. There were people who opposed me for many different reasons. And then they became my very best allies afterwards. And I think that I gained that respect because I listened. And I tried to help as much as I could. I tried to help them as much as I could. I did not impose my own political agendas because I didn't have any, but my own. As far as what was best for the city, I just stuck to that and never deviated from that. And they saw that I would stop the mayor when when I had to, and I would stop them when I had to. So I believe I got respect from both sides.
The word on the street is you don't need to be so humble about the sort of I believe. The word on the street, and when you read what is written, is that that's certainly true. The respect that is there for you, cross party through every different level is very, very real. And if I can come on to that, then working in such an environment, you've got to work with all sorts of people in all walks of life, all levels of seniority, some reporting to you, some not. Talk to us about how you manage that. Where does your ability to do that come from?
Well, the first thing that I noticed, and what the common theory is, that people do not work hard, that they're lazy, that they don't respond to the public. When I came in there, I was a public servant, and I made sure that the attorneys, I had a staff of about 18 attorneys under me, and the staff was about 40 altogether. And I made sure that everybody understood that we were all public servants, and we were there to service the public. And if people called, no matter how rude they were or how obnoxious or whatever, that, we still have to respond to the public. So that's something that I brought in, I think, and I was very adamant about. And every time I got a complaint about somebody not returning their call, I made sure that I talked to that person, because so as far as that is concerned, that is how we responded to the public. But the other thing about dealing with all walks of life, and also there's a lot of egos. Also, you have a lot of directors, the directors of departments, and oh my gosh, these people's egos, can be really become a problem. So, and I'm not one to take on bullies or whatever, but I always use being very nice. I was always very nice to everybody. Did not have a lot of confidence. I only had a conversation with one person, but I almost punched her out. But that was besides the point. But everybody else, and what I learned how to do. First of all, I learned how to have a poker face, which I never had before. So I learned how to listen, which was I think it's very important. I learned how to listen and be empathetic towards what they were doing. And I just try to work with them as much as I could, and to let them understand that I could work with them, but they may not get everything they want, but that at least I was trying if it was legally possible. So yes, it's managing people. And actually, I had never managed anybody before, and I found that I loved it. I found that I love managing people. I was able to navigate all those waters, all those politics, all those egos. I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
So in terms of your management, loving management, because that's a whole skill in itself. And something actually, you don't get taught in law school, really.
No.
And already hearing loud and clear that the law was very much the backstop. You were able to, guide the city councillors, guide the mayor by going, this is the law, this is what's right, and this is what's wrong. And I suppose that sort of strength of conviction is allied to that. But management is very fluid and very grey. So how did you take to that, and what have you learned in terms of managing up and coming lawyers and a team of lawyers? If you are handing out parcels of wisdom about management, what would you say?
Well, to the management team, so what I would say to those who are in charge of managing people, I think the most important thing that I learned how to do, and I actually enjoyed doing, I gave them a voice. I let them know, I gave them ownership in whatever project it was. They were part of this ownership. And I listened to them. Again, listening is just so important. I listened to them. I allowed them to make mistakes. I was there to help them. But the most important thing is I wanted them to take ownership and be part of this. If this project failed, they were part of that. If this project succeeded, they were part of that. And of course, I gave them all of the accolades that they deserved, but having them to make decisions and be part of the decision-making process. And basically, I didn't think about doing this, Keith. This was not something that I learned anywhere or whatever. To tell you the truth, the bottom line was I needed help. These people, I just came in from the street. These people have been there for a long time. They knew this better than I did. And I respected them. What I learned is that these government attorneys, most of them, 90% of them are very good, and they're there by choice, not because they couldn't get a job someplace else. They're very smart. And so I needed them. And I would form committees and different projects and different things. And I just needed that support system. And they stepped up. They stepped up to the plate, and they protected me. Really, that's what it was. They protected me. So I think that for those managers, if you listen to your employees, if you make them be part of the process and the decision making, and that it is true, not just tell them yeah, and at the end of the day, it really isn't that way. They will trust you. And they'll really go out to bat for you. And that's what I learned. That's a major thing that I learned.
Flipping that round then, and then talking to the sort of next generation, the up and coming lawyers that we have on the call and that will listen to this afterwards. Because we're getting feedback from people who say, oh, I just listened back. So, this is brilliant. This has some longevity. What would you say to the next generation in terms of, how to approach their roles? What to take on board, where to listen, where to learn, and where to push the envelope a little bit.
Well, I did think about this because I knew that you were going to ask me this. So I did. And the first thing I would say, what you should do as a young lawyer is you have to work hard. You have to work harder than anybody else. You have to, they taught us in law school, prepare, and then over prepare. Because there's nothing, especially if you're a litigator, there's nothing better than being in court and the judge or the opposing side raising something that you've already thought of and that you have an answer to. And that's complete. You get the trust of the judge and your opposing counsel, and you just build your credibility with them. So being over-prepared is something that you just can't do without. There's no replacement for being prepared and over prepared. There's nothing worse than to be in court and they ask you a question and you not know the answer to because you haven't thought about it. And it may be an obvious question. So that is the one thing that you have to do. You have to put the time in and you have to prepare. The other thing is, lots of people think that in order to be a lawyer, you have to be a bulldog, a shark, you have to be very confrontational. I have found that with a smile, you get a lot more. If you are nice and respectful to your opposition, to your opposition. If you are a professional, and sometimes it's hard because there are these attorneys out there that are just obnoxious. But you step back and always be respectful, always be dignified. You gain a lot more. And again, if you are a litigator and you're in court, the judge will understand, and you get you'll get a lot of credibility, and that goes a long way. Also, be alert to new opportunities, to new things that you can do. There are opportunities that are all over the place, but you have to keep your eyes open and your ears open and take advantage of that. Take advantage of those opportunities. Be an expert in your field, or try to be an expert in your field. Take all the steps necessary by, of course, learning your field and doing things like writing articles and doing seminars, heading committees in local bars and trade organizations. You want people, when they see you, let's say you're an IP attorney, they see you as the IP attorney. That's what you ultimately want. So that when somebody has an IP problem, they think of you. So you have to develop that expertise, of course, throughout time. And you develop that expertise through being engaged in that community, engaged in that world of your field. Being just a general practitioner or a general litigator presents its own problems. Those would be the things that I would say.
And it's really interesting, Lourdes, because there's a common theme that has come out, I think it's fair to say, Merrill, in with every one of our mentors since the beginning, about hard work, which every young lawyer is going, yeah, don't we just know about it? But it's true. And taking opportunities, saying yes to things when they come up, partly because you never know where it will lead, and partly because it raises you above above the ordinary, because you're saying, yes, I'll do that. I'll learn from it. I'll see where it takes me. I'm putting my head above the parapet, and I'm getting involved in things. And it's clear, again, just listening to your story about how you got the role at the mayor's office, that some of that came. You may have been not necessarily a young lawyer, a more experienced lawyer, but the same philosophy of being in the right place, getting involved in things. This time it was the community, raised your profile to a point that people noticed. If we're going to go back before we come forward again. So going back to your young lawyer self, and putting you in a time machine now and sending you back to talk to young or younger Lourdes, what would you be telling her, and at what stage would you be doing that?
Well, as you know, my career is not a conventional career, and because I took some time off to raise my children, and then I did all these sorts of things. But what I would tell my younger self, when I was raising my children, I should have probably worked part-time or kept my hand into my career a little bit more than I did. I didn't have anybody to raise my children. At the time, I didn't have family around here and where I lived. And I was, because of other circumstances in life, I wanted to raise my children. I was, one of the circumstances is that, I prosecuted juveniles when I was in the state attorney's office in Miami. And if you remember, at that time, it was in the 1980s, the the drug cartels in Miami. It was very dangerous at that time. And I was prosecuting juveniles. One of my rotations was prosecuting juveniles, and I saw how these juveniles were getting into trouble really between the hours of 3 and 5 when they were alone in the house. And that really made an impression on me. And I thought, if I were to ever have kids, I wanted to be home because if something were to happen to them, I would feel very, very guilty about it. And that was that's my own personal thing because that's what I saw. And I didn't have anybody around here. So what I probably should have done was probably kept my hand in my profession for all those years, a little bit more. I probably wouldn't have done it full time. I'm sure. I know I would not have done it. I didn't do it full time, but at that time in Pittsburgh, they didn't have really for attorneys part-time opportunities. That was not really a thing, and especially in my area of law. So, but I should have done it. That's probably what I would have told myself.
But I mean, your kids are undoubtedly benefited from having you there and probably proud of you, or maybe not. Maybe they're like, Mom, go to work.
Oh, I'm sure if you tell them, I screwed them up somehow. I know I screwed them up somehow.
That's the role of that's the role of the parent, whether you like it or not. Life
Right.
lessons.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit then about that in terms of well, there's a single-mindedness in you, clearly. That's coming through loud and clear in terms of the decisions you've made, the way you've managed your career and life choices, the way you manage people, and I've experienced it in the white collar practice group, which you're definitely somebody people turn to, again, like you said, with that smile, with that charm, but with that steel and clarity of conviction. So where does that single-mindedness come from? And is that something that you've learned, or was that part of the tikitiki handed down from your mum?
Tikitiki comes from my mother. I think that comes from how I was raised. As some of you know, I fled Cuba when I was about 7 years old in 1968. When we came over, my parents didn't speak any English, so that parent role, my brother and I, he's 2 years older than I am, and we were really their parents in the sense of we had to translate it once we learned English, because we came without English. But once we were a little bit older, we have to become their parents in the sense of that we had to translate everything. I went with my mother for her job interview, and I corrected her when she was interviewing for a job, and she got the job, by the way. But still, she'll never forget that and never let that. Instead of us as parents providing for their kids, they provided in every way, the love and all of that. But as far as how to navigate the United States, how to, the laws, the insurance, insurance, checking accounts, those things that are just common to everybody, we had to become their we were the ones to advise them. My father at one point had an upholstery shop that he upholstered. And either my brother or I would go to every single one of those estimates and be the translator. So we took a role as a mature role. And maybe that's why, I don't know, but my brother's the same way. It comes from that. I don't know.
So let's come on then to, taking 14 years out, making a very deliberate and a very positive decision to raise your family, but something that, you've touched on this, is not very common in the law, and is certainly something that a lot of families, and particularly women, I suppose battle with, in the sense, how do you maintain a career and have a family, and particularly a career in the law, which is so demanding, both because of the discipline and because of clients and the way that law firms are set up. And you took the decision to say, no, I'm stepping out. And you're saying, maybe it would have been better if I'd kept a hand in somehow. But then what drove the decision to come back? And how was that? How did you manage that process, and what did you come up against?
Well, the truth of the matter is I slept my way back into the profession. And I know everybody's like, what? My husband does the same thing I do. And he needed help. He had a white collar criminal case, back then. And he said, can you help me? I don't have anybody to help me. And I said, well, I'll just, do a little research here and there. And then that's how I started. And, of course, as time went on, the more and more and more I got involved and all of that. But I still made sure, though, that because when I came back, it was on my own terms. And I still made sure that I was home when they got home from school. So most of the time, we did have trials, and we did, and at that point my parents would come out to take care of the children and all that, because I couldn't do it all. But really at that time in Pittsburgh, you couldn't do that. Even if I wanted to go out there and get hired and apply for a job, no one would have given me a job at that time. Pittsburgh was not ready for that yet. I think it's different now, but not at that time. So that's how I came back into the profession. I stumbled into that. I wasn't even looking for that. But here I am.
And so now you're back with Pietragallo, but you've had a previous, and you very kindly led them back into the Mackrell International fold. But you've had a sort of a previous iteration with Mackrell International. Now, it clearly means something to you personally, and you're a smart enough and grounded enough lawyer to know that actually there's going to be a broader benefit. What brought you back to Mackrell International, and what made you go? I mean, I can see that the big boss, that Mr. P is with us on the call. It's great to have you with us. At some point you've gone into his office and gone, hey, we should be back with MI. I've had some experience, and this is why. How did that conversation go?
Well, I have to say, not because Bill is present, because I would have said this anyways. And the reason why I came to Pietragallo was literally because of Bill, and this is a very family-friendly place. He has and really, I wish Bill wouldn't have been here, because I would have said this anyways. And now it seems corny, but it's a very family-friendly place. What I was talking about, empathy, Bill is very empathetic. He has a great heart. And that's where I wanted. I mean, at my age, I didn't want to go to a big law firm and do all that stupid stuff. I wanted to be in a place that I felt welcome, and Bill and everybody here, but particularly Bill, because he's the person that I knew the most, made me feel very welcome. And so that's why I wanted to be here. And as soon as I said, well, I know this Mackrell, and I've been a part of Mackrell for a very long time. I know all these people. I see Juan is on the line, and Allison, and I'm hoping to get together with Chuck Cole. I know that Meryl remembers Chuck in Chicago. I mean, and we still, Juan's daughter and my daughter are friends on via the internet. They talk to each other. I mean, so it is a family. Mackerel is a family. And so I have a very special place. But what I was talking about being involved in heading organizations and heading committee, that's what I did in Mackerel. In Mackerel, I headed, before you, Keith, some of you know, I headed the practice group, the practice groups. And I wanted to be indispensable. I didn't want you guys to kick me out. So what did I do? I took a big decision because I wanted to be, I wanted to be noticed. I wanted to be, to do something. And that took a long time, a lot of my time. So Mackerel is, and I have to tell you, Keith, again, not again, but I do have to tell you that the level of activity that I've seen now between us, the Mackerel members, is a lot higher than it was before. And I mean, just in the past week, I've probably had 3 or 4 interactions with Mackerel members. So different interactions, whether I refer cases to them or they refer cases to me. So it is. I mean, I really like this organization a lot. So.
Well, thank you. You can come again. It's interesting hearing you say that you've had a relationship for a long time, and that you've worked on that. So I'm going to then ask you, because we've got a lot of younger lawyers on the call. What do they do to make the most out of, I suppose, not just the Mackrell International Network, but in terms of building their careers and their networks and their connections? What advice would you give them?
The advice is what I've given before is try to not only join organizations, because anybody can join an organization, but be active in it, take a leadership role. For instance, white collar, women in white collar is in Pittsburgh is very small. We have probably about only 4 women, and they're very young. I'm the mom, and but there's a national organization, actually an international organization of women in white collar criminal defense, and that I joined, and then I'm heading that here in Pittsburgh. And so what I have to do, because I'm heading that, I also am in touch with the national group. I'm in touch with the Philadelphia group. I'm in touch with other groups, and we do things, well, now it's virtual, but we do things together. So so it's not just joining and showing, and it is showing up, but it's actually doing it. And the other thing is, which sometimes I because of time, it's a problem. When you sign up to be a leader, you have to follow through and not say things that you're going to do and not do, because that just shows your work ethics. And so it's important. So don't go heading a lot of different committees and different things if you don't have the time to actually follow through and do the work. Because then again, everything is reputation and credibility. So you lose a lot of that. So if you just want to concentrate on one thing and just do it and do it right, that's probably the best thing to do.
You've touched on the women white collar group, but actually, and you've also mentioned Alison. Alison is the head of the Mackrell International Women's Group. Right. I know that you've come to a meeting. I know that Amanda in Malaysia, thank you for staying up late for us. Amanda has come along to a meeting. I know that a couple of the other women from Mackrell International, from Mackrell Solicitors, have joined us as well. But I mean, something to say to Michaela, Rebecca, Abby, I think you may have joined us in the past. I think picking up on what Lourdes says, you can't always lead. and lawyers are, you guys are always busy, and managing different priorities, personal as well as professional. But there are opportunities within the Mackrell International Network to connect, to turn up to a group, and particularly when it's a smaller group like the women's group or the next generation group, and look around the room and go, hey, oh well, Amy, you might go. Amanda in Malaysia, I'll drop her a line afterwards, and see what she does, and there you've got a connection, and if ever something bubbles up out of it, you're going to be able to go, oh, I know somebody in Malaysia, I know somebody in London, I know somebody in Pittsburgh. So I think it's the Mackrell International family is there. If you're just using it as a directory, it's wasted. You can't always devote the time to it, but you can do one or two things a week that don't take a lot of time to just build the connection and get yourself involved. And we've seen you do that, Lourdes, and with that sort of quiet conviction, people are going, what do you think? So that experience that you've built up over time is now sort of definitely bearing fruit. How do you see the differences, working for the mayor's office and now working within a firm? What has one thing brought you and the other thing brought you? What are the pros and cons, I guess?
Well, the mayor's office is very dynamic, and there, I have to say most people listen to me. They took me seriously, and they took my advice, and I had a lot of different people. I mean, I was always on the go. You never sit down, and never. It was always on the go. I always had meetings, and all that. Private practice is very different, obviously. You don't have that. The pressures of bringing in business is constant, and it's something that we don't, that is important to do. You have to do, but it's pressure, so that you don't have in the city. So, there are pros and cons to both. I'm lucky enough to be specifically in the white collar, although I do also, some municipal and zoning, and I do a lot of, some discrimination cases, civil rights, but in white collar, in criminal, I'm lucky enough to have clients that, their issues are very personal to them because they may go to jail, right? So as opposed to having a corporate client doing something that is not as personal, a contract or something. So in that respect, what I do and what the being in the city, I guess you're doing it in the city, you're doing it for the public good. And as a white collar, you're thinking of your client in a very personal way. So I think there is some correlation to that, specifically in the line of work that I do. But it's very different. You cannot compare working in government or as a prosecutor as to working in a law firm. It's very different. The motivation is quite different.
So everybody on this call is working for a law firm, apart from the team at MIHQ, of course. So again, maybe I can ask you for when you're seeing younger attorneys coming through at Pietragallo, and when you're seeing other young professionals in the other sort of community involvement that you have, what do you notice about the generational differences, and if you were to be able to share again a word of wisdom about that, what would it be?
Well, what I have seen is the new generation has, they focus more on life work experiences, that they really, they don't want to work, they don't want this profession to be their end all be all. So they really want to have other types of experiences. And so that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because, as I said, you cannot replace hard work. You cannot replace being prepared. And if you think that this is a job that you can at 5 o'clock just clock out, then this may not be for you because you're not servicing your client. So if you're bright enough, or if you can do it between the 9 and 5 and be prepared and do everything, then that's good. This is a profession, this is a service industry, and you just have to be prepared. So the balance is good. You need balance, and the employers have to understand that the new generation wants the balance. And as long as they do good work and they service their client appropriately, then having set, hours or whatever may not make sense. But at the same time, the quality control is very, very important. Just because somebody is working 14 hours a day doesn't mean that they're working wisely and that their quality is good. But the quality control is really the most important thing.
So how do you ensure people are working smart and just not just hard or long hours?
That's a difficult question, right? Because you just don't know. And as an employer, you cannot be babysitting. You cannot be reading everything that everybody does, right? So that's just a difficult question. I think at the end of the day, who's prepared and who's not, who has crossed all their T's, dotted their I's, and whose performance in court or whose project is you cannot poke holes at, who is thorough and complete. I think that the attorneys who are managing these younger folks will understand that and know what their younger attorneys are doing. But if you want to keep talent, you also need to be flexible, and you need to allow them to have this life work balance. And now we're in the COVID stage, or past COVID, or almost past COVID, where now a lot of people have stayed home. So a lot of people do not want to come to the office 100% of the time. So employers will need to make those decisions. It's important to have employees who are happy where they are as well. So
definitely, but there's no shortcuts.
Right. No, there are no shortcuts.
Okay, Lourdes, I have a final question for you, which is going to be a bit of a curveball, but you knew that was going to happen. Before I ask that, though, we've got almost 30 people on the call, which is the draw you have, Lourdes. Either that, or you've got a very good 3-line whip. I want to ask the group, and put it in the chat if you don't want to unmute and ask it. Does anybody have any specific questions for Lourdes about her journey, her experience? And if not, I'm going to go for the killer question. Hang on, I've got Chris. You've got a question.
You have to.
Yeah, Chris, where are you? There we go. Now, Chris was on a LinkedIn call the other day, and he was asking all sorts of challenging question. So
Chris always does.
That's good. Chris, what's your question? He's gone shy now. Okay. Well, Lourdes, I'm gonna pop it in the chat if it comes to you, Chris. Lourdes, I'm gonna ask you the question. What would you like your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be that of somebody who's ethical, somebody who tried to help people, and somebody who's been true to her profession. I love this profession, and that's what I would like people to think of me as, somebody who has tried to help people using my profession.
And what's kept you in love with the law, with your profession?
Just learning more and more and more. Each case presents a whole variety of new things, and every case has something to learn. And I'm lucky enough that I don't have two cases alike. I've never had in my life two cases that are not even resemble each other. They're like very different cases. And it's a lot of fun, and just learning and having new experiences like that is really exhilarating.
And do you think that that's because of the sort of different sectors you've worked in, or do you think that's particular to white collar, or do you think that's the law in itself?
Both. I mean, both. In white collar, no two criminals do the same. I should say criminals. No two defendants do the same crime, right? Also getting to know these people, getting to know my clients. I love most of my clients. I really have a good relationship with, and as a matter of fact, I'm still in touch with most of them. And they're a one-time deal usually. They don't commit another white collar crime in their careers. But I continue to have a relationship with them because I go through the journey with them, and it's something that is personal. I do the same with the city, and with the people at the city. I just had a very good relationship with them. But things that I don't have anything that is the same case twice. So it's not repetitive. I don't see them as numbers. I don't see them as they're all individual human beings with individual problems, and they're going through really difficult times. So I try to help them through those difficult times.
And I'm guessing these are the ones that are behind bars are probably less sort of less friendly, less in touch, or is that not the case?
I'm sorry, say that again. I was actually reading.
Yeah, Chris has got there. I was kind of playing for time as well because I knew Chris was writing his question. Right. But you were saying you've maintained really strong relationships with the individuals that you've helped. I'm guessing that's more so that the ones that are not behind bars as opposed to the ones that are both.
Even those afterwards, yes. Because I have gone to when they're local, I have gone to the jails to see them just to make sure. I mean, remember, these are not criminals that have committed violent crimes. These are, people like us, right? That
people who lost their way.
They lost their way, made wrong decisions for wrong reasons. And so, I develop a relationship with them, and sometimes I have one in Miami that every time I go to Miami, not every time, but I go see them. So it's just, so Chris is asking about what is the criteria for prosecution? Do we have full, when I was a prosecutor in DC, or whether we have full discretion, or you have to toe the line in terms of policies and approach? No, prosecutors, first of all, I started my career in the state attorney's office in Miami, and I'm not sure whether you guys knew Janet Reno. She ultimately became the attorney general here, the first woman attorney general of the United States. But prior to that, she was the state attorney in Miami. So I was a young lawyer under her, and she taught me my ethics. And that's where I got my ethics. And I couldn't say anything, what I can say about her is just awesome. It's just great. So I got her ethics. And at that time, and the ethics, and all prosecutors are under a code of ethics as a prosecutor. So never, specifically Miami, none of the prosecutors that were there, one was maybe, but we did not, there was never anything from Ms. Reno telling us what we should prosecute and what we shouldn't. If we could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then we should prosecute. There were circumstances that even if we could prove it under reasonable doubt, that there were circumstances that maybe you didn't want to prosecute. But that's when you go upstairs and you talk about it. But no, never. And I do not know of one case in either the state attorney's office in Miami or the U.S. attorney's office in D.C. where a prosecutor indicted a case that they didn't think they could win beyond a reasonable doubt. I never received from anybody any instructions, no, you have to prosecute this case. And plus we were under ethical obligations not to, if we couldn't prove the case. So.
Great question, Chris. You can come again. And a great answer.